Welcome to another episode of the Zach Highley Show. Today, I have the honor of being with my dad yet again, thankfully, and he's going to talk to us about alternative careers in medicine. Because a lot of people, they go through med school and maybe they don't want to go the normal clinical path. So a quick bio on my dad. My dad was born and raised in London, where he went to medical school and became a psychiatrist. He then joined the pharmaceutical company GlaxoSmithKline in developing new antidepressant drugs, famously some of the SSRIs we are all, of course, aware of today. This job took him to the U.S., where he started our family with my mom, and my dad was responsible for running hundreds of clinical trials, directed R&D for various pharmaceutical companies, and personally led the development and approval of 14 new therapies, such as Lexapro, Paxil, and Namenda, and these have had fantastic impacts on patient lives. He's currently working in healthcare, investing with new startup drug and device companies, and today we'll be discussing, as I said, alternative careers in medicine, specifically because my dad practiced medicine for 2 years, psychiatry specifically, and then left. So let's start off with why did you go into medicine in the first place?
So my parents said, if you're a doctor, you'll always have a job. It was sort of a pragmatic decision, I guess. I was at school. I was doing in the UK, and so we did our exams there. Was sort of in the UK. The system is that you take 10 at the time. You take a bunch of exams across all subjects when you're 16. They're called O-level, ordinary levels. Mm-hmm. Sort of, you've heard about these on Harry Potter.
Owls.
Right? Yeah, owls. They're called something else nowadays. And then you specialize, as it were. You pick 3 subjects, 4 subjects, and you do them at A-level. So I picked biology, chemistry, and maths for my A-level subjects. And given I was sort of a science track, I guess you'd call it, as hopeless as at languages and arts. The people who were reasonably good got to sort of go for what they wanted to go, and medicine seemed like a good idea at the time. You know, I was in the science track, and if you can get into med school, the general feeling was you go to med school.
So it's interesting because I think this is sometimes what a lot of people do is it was just kind of, there was no master plan to be a psychiatrist or master plan to be a surgeon or anything like that. It was just, med school seems like a good thing to do, so might as well do it.
Yeah, it was sort of it sounded like fun.
Yeah.
There was no one in my family was a doctor at the time.
Uh-huh.
No, I mean maybe someone in my extended family, but so it seemed like something I might like to do and I might be good at. So I went to med school.
Were you good at it?
Was I good at what?
Med school. Medicine.
I was reasonably good at med school.
Yeah.
I was reasonably competent, I think, at medicine.
Yeah.
Yes. I could do it. I was hopeless with my hands, oddly enough. I hated doing any form of procedure. I hated anatomy.
Yeah.
Hopeless at it. Good at biochemistry, good at physiology. That's in the first
before
2 years.
You're in the clinic.
Before you're in the clinic. In the clinic, I liked the thinking bits. I didn't like the doing bits. I wasn't very good at sort of cutting, stitching. I avoided anything surgical. I can't make things with my hands.
And it seems like the perfect profession to do nothing with your hands is psychiatry.
So it seems, yeah. It wasn't actually the idea when I first got into psychiatry.
Okay.
But
what was the idea when you first went into psychiatry?
So when you finish med school in the UK at the time, you had to pick where you wanted to go. So I firstly you do house jobs. That's a year. You do 6 months surgery. And then you do 6 months.
And you're practicing as a doctor at this
You're
point.
practicing as a doctor. You're really the lowest of the low.
Yeah, like an intern.
An intern, basically. You're the lowest of the low. So I did 6 months surgery at a hospital called Stoke Mandeville Hospital. And then I came back to my teaching hospital in London. Did 6 months, 3 months medicine, adult medicine, and 3 months pediatrics, interestingly. So you have to do your first year. And then you get that's house officer. And then you become a senior house officer. So I spent 6 months in what we would call accident emergency in the US.
The emergency room.
Which I thought was great. Because, one of the reasons I want to go into medicine, I guess, was back in the day was I want to know if I came across a crash or something, when
Could
I
I
was
save the
driving,
day?
could I do something?
Yeah.
Could I didn't want to be hopeless and helpless. So, and doing 6 months in the emergency room, and at some point you were the only physician running the emergency room as an SHO. It was it showed that you could do it.
Mm-hmm.
It was an achievement to be that person running the emergency room. I mean, not the real complicated stuff, but dealing with things, triaging, knowing when to call stabilizing, knowing when to call the other services, as you would call it, and we'd call it the other specialties. But
And when does psychiatry come in?
So where did psychiatry? So when you've done that, you have to decide what you want to do when you grow up, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you can do your house of, and at some point you have to decide. And I thought I wanted to be primary care, right? Yeah. But I didn't get into it. At the time, primary care was, maybe still is, but it was reasonably tough to get into when I left med school back in 83, 84, 85, I guess. So I thought, well, you had to do sort of 3 years training until you took your speciality exams in primary care, and that could comprise sort of 6 different specialties: psychiatry, general medicine, peds. I don't know, and you added them all together, and you became and you could go on there were structured ways to do this, where you could go for 3 years to a sort of to learn to get your qualification as a primary care physician. Yeah. And then you could do it yourself. And so because I didn't actually get into one of these sort of structured courses, I thought, I'll go do myself. Yeah. I also didn't want to leave London. Yeah. So I looked around and found a place to go and do psychiatry, which was in London, a hospital called Northwick Park Hospital. And I went there, and they were looking for, at the time it was a senior house officer, the first year's senior house officer. So I decided to do 6 months psychiatry, and 6 months became a year. And then a year became 3 years, and I got what we would call my membership, Royal College, a member of the Royal College of Psychiatry. I took my exams, I became a psychiatrist, like a board certified psychiatrist, because I was lucky. I happened to land with a group of people who, without doubt, were the preeminent group in the UK at the time in the area of psychotic illness and schizophrenia. So, and they were brilliant people, and they were remarkable teachers and incredible doctors. So it was absolutely, I didn't know anything about it. I happened to land there, and it was incredibly fortuitous. One of my bosses became the president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. They were incredibly smart, incredibly dedicated psychiatrists, and they were very biological. So it was not sort of psychoanalyst. We frightened out the psychoanalysts. They couldn't stand it, because we felt it was all nonsense, which I think most people feel nowadays. A lot of psychoanalysis is nonsense, babble. But this was biological, empirically based. They did a lot of the formative work in schizophrenia. So I was just very fortunate. I really got a phenomenally solid grounding. We saw, it was like a tertiary center for schizophrenia, basically.
So you did 5 years of clinical medicine?
Yes,
then?
5 years.
5 years. Wow.
I qualified. 6 really. I qualified in 83. Yeah. And I joined the industry in 89. So 6 years.
You did a good amount of clinical medicine. So why did you leave psychiatry?
Well, I'd wanted to.
Yeah. When did you know when you wanted to leave psychiatry?
Probably. It wasn't psychiatry I left. I actually liked psychiatry. Clinical medicine. I'd say I left clinical medicine, not psychiatry. I wouldn't, if I'd have done any other form, I would have
practicing
left it too. I think I was looking to leave after about 3 years, or 4 years, I guess. I'd just started, I'd sort of done a year in psychiatry. Yeah. And I thought, it's okay, but it's not where I want to spend my life. I don't want to spend my life in clinical medicine. And I started to look at the pharmaceutical industry. Mm-hmm. I guess, it sounds dreadful, but medicine is often for very caring people, right? Yes. I mean, and for me, I felt, while, it was it was intellectually stimulating, looking after patients and certainly working with the people I was working with. The sort of, I guess, the caring aspect of it, while it was great, some people are built to care.
Yeah.
And and for me, it was, it wasn't what I could spend my entire life doing,
Yeah.
It just, I wanted something I felt more intellectually challenging. Not that it's, and I don't mean to minimize medicine in any of these comments, right? For me, it wasn't the right mix.
Yeah.
I couldn't see myself, doing it. I think at the time, my boss, who was one of my mentors, who I still speak to, a fabulous person, he said, look, if when there's sort of, as you advance in medicine, or someone told me, you can do one of three things. You can run a hospital, right? You can dedicate purely to clinical medicine, which is fabulous, of course. You can run a hospital, or you can go into research, or you can go to private medicine. But private medicine is another form of looking after patients. And I was okay at it. I was reasonable at it, but I didn't get the same sort of, I didn't get the same excitement from it, I guess, from that. So I sort of looked around. I thought, well, what can I do? Part of my philosophy, and probably get onto that, is you don't start again, right? The reality is you use what you've got to propel you forward. So what can I do? I've got medicine, right? I've got medicine. I've got psychiatry. What can I do that uses my skills, my learnings, my experience to take me somewhere else? And pharmaceuticals was one obvious choice.
Yeah.
So I'd actually looked into it about 2 years before I joined SmithKline Beecham at the time.
Yeah.
I'd gone to see someone, oddly enough, at Glaxo about a job.
Yeah.
And his advice, which was great advice for me at the time, was why don't you go back, you're halfway through your psychiatric training, train as a psychiatrist, and when you've got your membership, your boards, then join the industry. Then you're coming in with a certain degree of expertise, which will be valuable to you in the industry. In fact, it was incredibly valuable to me, oddly enough, as luck turned out. And once again, it's about being in the right place at the right time. But fundamentally, the psychiatric component of my training was hugely beneficial to me.
So you were maybe 18 months away from completing your psychiatric boards, I guess, when you had this conversation with the guy from GSK?
About that, yeah.
Because that's because it's still another 18 months, right?
With a lot of work.
But can you just tell me a little bit more about the decision to continue the 18 months? Was it solely because this guy said, it's going to be worth it in the 18 months for your future career, or was it just...
I think had he said, there's a job for you here, come take it, I would have taken the job.
Got it, okay. Got it.
I don't think he had a job for me at the time.
I see, okay.
So, I applied for a certain job, and I saw him, and I think he probably had better candidates for the job that he was offering.
What was the job?
I can't even recall now. I don't think it was anything psychiatric per se. I don't think Glaxo, as it were at the time, had a specific psychiatric drug in development. Not that I can recall, though.
Got it. And then I think we touched on this a little bit. Were there certain aspects of clinical medicine which you didn't really like? I think you said it before, but I think what I'm trying to say is I think a lot of people, sometimes people might find themselves in your shoes. Yeah. And it's it seems like a crazy decision to make, right? How do you know, you'll never know if you made the right decision or the wrong decision, but how do you know if maybe you should lean more towards one decision for the other? Do you remember any of the thoughts that went through your head or anything like that?
Well, one, I know I made the right decision.
Yeah, okay, so you made the right decision. Got it.
My mother was deeply disappointed that I'd left medicine when I left medicine. And 3 weeks later, she said to me, wow, that was clearly a excellent decision.
3 weeks.
3 weeks. Wow. I can remember that. She said, you seem incredibly sort of excited, engaged, whatever. But I guess, repeat the question. So I'm sorry.
Were there certain aspects of clinical medicine that you just didn't like?
I guess it was, I found it slightly repetitious.
Yeah.
I think once again, in medicine, you tend to subspecialize and subspecialize and subspecialize, right? You tend to get very good at doing something, but it seemed repetitious. I'm sure it's not, and I didn't pursue it, right? And I loved what I was doing I was very fortunate. It was incredibly stimulating academic intellectual environment where I was working. But I'm not sure how that goes for 20, 30 years. I mean, if it seemed that I'd be doing the same thing. I'd be going to clinic on Tuesday and Thursday. I'd be doing rounds on Monday and Wednesday. I'd be writing letters after the fact, et cetera, and I'd see the same conditions again and again. So and clearly that's not what medicine is. Medicine's about caring for patients, looking after them holistically, dealing with them. And that's hugely beneficial to patients, and I'm sure for the right people, for doctors, there's immeasurable value to themselves in all sorts of ways to be gained from that as a life.
I want to focus on the transition a little bit more because I think it's again, it seems like a crazy thing leaving medicine to go into industry. Was there a gut feeling that slowly built? How did you have the thought when you first went into psychiatry? I'm just wondering the timeline of when you thought clinical medicine isn't for me, and then reaching out to someone at GlaxoSmithKline, and then obviously we know at the end of the 3 years is when you joined. But I'm wondering when it became from, this is a thought of maybe I don't want to do this, to I'm going to start looking at jobs.
So the other part of this, right?
Yeah.
My friends weren't doctors.
Yeah.
My friends were in advertising. My close friend, advertising or at the time, whatever, Texas Instruments. My first cousin was in Texas Instruments. He went into sort of finance. And I had accountants as friends and lawyers as friends. And what seemed different about their jobs was they were interacting in a highly competitive sort of environment, dynamic environment. And while medicine is that, it was a different sort of environment. It's sort of enclosed in the hospital network, and and it was challenging in a different way. But I felt that this sort of the environments they work on appealed to me. To be honest, sort of to be out there, sort of competing and working in a corporate environment. It sort of appealed to me.
Yeah. And do you remember when you said, did you tell anyone, listen, or did you just go find recruiters, or did you just email? Yeah, I guess did you email? Did you email back then or no?
We didn't, there was no email.
There was no email.
Not back then, no.
Would you call on the phone and say?
Actually, I must have called, I guess. Yeah, I can't remember how it came about. I think I had there was a recruiter or, you'd spoke to someone who knew someone or something like that. But I ended up going for an interview at SmithKline Beecham. And they liked me, and I took the job.
Is the only place you looked at?
Yeah, it was the first place I'd looked at.
Yeah.
Well, after Glaxo back in the day. So but it was sort of, I knew I didn't want to be in medicine basically, and I knew I wanted to get out, and I knew I wanted to be. I guess, and I'm trying to be careful here not to be sort of negative about medicine, because I'm not negative about medicine. But for me, it was about being out in the real world. Yeah, there's something about medicine that's sort of not the real world. I mean, it's a different
It's like a
world.
microcosm.
It's a microcosm, right?
Yeah.
You're in a big hospital environment. You're dealing with people who are unwell. It's not that sort of, I don't know, combative, challenging.
I know what you mean.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's people looking to you to help them a lot, and that wasn't. Well, it was nice. It wasn't.
The answers are defined usually. Usually there is a right answer that you can. Yeah. What was this first job like? Do you remember the title? Do you remember what it was?
I was a medical advisor.
Okay. What is that?
It was just, it's a title. It's the lowest title you go in as a doctor in the industry in the UK at the time.
Got it.
So I worked for SmithKline Beecham locally in the UK. Uh-huh. So it was even then it was SmithKline French when I joined, but it quickly became SmithKline Beecham. There was a merger of SmithKline French and Beecham that came together, this was a local branch essentially of a global corporation, and we didn't get very much involved in the sort of the global piece of it. And then when I moved to the States with them, I became much more involved in the global piece, because the US was sort of part of the global piece complex sort of structure.
And what are you doing? Are they saying, here's a drug idea we want you to
So
look at?
when I first joined, I was working on a drug called Tagamet.
Okay, yeah.
Or a line extension of Tagamet. There was something.
Yeah.
Well, no, Zantac was odd story, but Tagamet. Oddly enough, Tagamet was the first $1 billion drug.
Wow.
It was SmithKline Beecham's, and about 3 months later, Glaxo came out with Zantac, which beat Zantac and became the second $1 billion drug, as far as I know. And then the companies merged. So, but at the time, there's massive rivalry.
And by work on, sorry to back up, work on, what do you mean? Are you looking at these drugs going through trials? Are you looking at evidence? Are you looking at sales of these drugs?
Sales at that time.
Yeah, got it.
Tagamet, I think, was approved by the English authorities around the mid-'80s, maybe 86. It was a huge drug at the time. I mean, if we go back, people were actually having operations for stomach ulcers. I had a friend who had an operation for a stomach ulcer. There was really, this was before the the
PPIs,
the omeprazoles, right? So it was a fascinating time for the industry. You just got your first $1 billion drug, these H2 blockers, and they were remarkable in their time.
Yeah.
They literally, I don't know the numbers, but massively, 90% reduction in need for surgery, right? So, and then the proton pumps were another step up, right? Just amazing breakthroughs in the GI space. So I was doing that, and this was some silly line extension.
And then at what point did they say, go to America?
I asked to go to America.
You asked to go to America?
Yeah.
Why did you ask to go to America?
I always wanted to go to America.
Really?
Yeah. I first went to America in 1980 and was blown away by it. And then I went in 81. And it was odd. Everything was bigger here. And they didn't have food courts in the UK in 80 and 81.
Food courts?
Yeah, no, seriously. Food courts were unbelievable. And Disney World was unbelievable. I mean, just this, it was very different back then. Everything didn't exist everywhere, right? So a food court in America was like nothing you had seen before in the UK. I mean, they're all over the place now, food courts. But then it was like you're a 20-year-old and you're wandering around and you can eat all these different foods, Chinese food, pizza, it was just amazing. And the quantities, and it was wild. And you go, wow, this is incredible. I've never seen anything like this before, right? And this was England in the 80s, and we were infamous for our food, of course. Yeah. The UK in the 70s and 80s were infamous. And it was just the attitude of Americans was just can do. It was incredible. It just seemed different. England seemed sort of, I mean, people say America's tacky and it's sort of, and everyone's superficial. But I didn't think that. I thought it was great, just big. Yeah. The frightening was because people had guns. Yeah. And the police had guns, at least, because ours didn't. I mean, they still don't, but I'm not there. But it was like, wow, this is wild. And I think at some point, a bit later on, because I was 20 then. Yeah. And I didn't move till I was 92. Yeah. But at some point, going back and forth, and it just, the whole scale of it was mind blowing. It just what you could get here and do here, and everything was bigger here. Yeah, I mean, I remember sort of walking around furniture shops because I had an apartment in the UK, right? But I looked at some of these furniture shops, and the furniture was amazing. It was just big, and I thought, wow, to be able to buy this furniture and to put it into your apartment.
Okay, let's focus up here. I too love America.
Right.
But that sounds amazing. But so how do you go to research and development? Were you always in research and development? Are you always looking at clinical trials? Because I know you built your career on managing and running clinical trials, right? How do you go from more sales, right, which you said you were doing at Tagamet, to research and development?
Well, so I wasn't sales. I've never been commercial. I don't do marketing and sales. I work with a lot of marketing and salespeople. Got it. Right? But the job of when I'm talking about is being on is supporting the commercial organizations. That's all about educating doctors about the features and benefits of drugs. Teaching sales force how the drugs work so they can communicate to doctors. Teaching the sales force, what the evidence is from clinical studies and how to use the drugs and what the basis is for what clinical trials have been conducted to show how they work and to show how they can benefit their patients. So it's about communicating the science, the clinical side of things, and the differences of various drugs, etc., and the safety aspects of them too.
How do you go from that to clinical trials and designing clinical
trials? So what we used to do at that point was sort of what they used to call phase 4 clinical study, post-marketing studies, right? So once they're out but when you go into drug development, we've spoken about this before, phase 1, 2, and 3, particularly phase 3, those are the big clinical trials. Those are the big studies that you undertake. I think that's a skill set. You learn that. You learn how to design a clinical trial, a well-controlled clinical study. Now, a lot of that is set out for you. There's, you're not thinking this up from out of your head.
I'm just wondering, you individually, as a part of this company, how do they say, okay, Ivan, you're running, speaking to doctors and educating them about these new drugs, to saying, okay, Ivan, we want you to design the next clinical trial for Paxil or something like that.
Right.
How does that happen to you individually?
So one of the very first studies I think I designed was a study for the use of paroxetine, Paxil, in obsessive compulsive disorder.
I see.
Right? But I'm not creating that construct from the ground up. There are other drugs had been approved by FDA, by the European regulators, for the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah.
So I follow the blueprint. You have to use, I think there's, I forget the name of the scale. There's a specific scale that measures the symptoms of OCD.
I'm just wondering, within the company, sorry to interrupt you again.
Yeah,
within the company, does someone come to you and say, Ivan, we want you to design this trial? Is it when they merge, they said, you know what, Ivan, you're going to run, do you have a new position? Do you have a new title? I'm just wondering if someone joins a pharmaceutical company, right, and they're told, you're going to be the doctor that's communicating to other doctors on how to sell drugs. How do you make the transition, you personally, how does the company say, Ivan, you are now the person that's responsible for designing these drugs? Do you ask, I want to design these trials? Does someone say, we need a psychiatrist who knows about this stuff? So they tell you, we're changing you from doing this to this. I'm just wondering the logistics of within the company.
100 different ways.
Got it.
I can't speak to all of it. You can ask for it. You can take a new job. You can say, look, I don't want to be in phase 3B4 anymore. If that's what you were, I want to move into the central area and help design the studies to go for regulatory approval. In my particular case, in the UK, we spent 2 years launching Paxil, right? When I went to America, I moved into this more central unit, and we were trying to get Paxil approved for a bunch of indications: panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, eventually social phobia, which was a first. We were the first drug for that. So that was there we had to create a whole new path. But that was my job. I took over that whole team.
Got it.
For Paxil. So I had to design these studies. I wasn't creating the construct of designing this, but I had to pull a team together, oversee that team. We had to write a protocol. The protocol had to, as protocols do, it tells you how to run the study. It tells the sort of patients that are going to be in the study. It tells you the type of tools you're going to use to measure improvement in those patients over the course of that study, and how you're going to monitor safety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we had to, and then there's the whole other piece of that, which is not just the design. There's a whole operational part too, which is the people who actually go out to the centers where the patients are studied as part of the clinic, in any hospitals and specific centers around the country.
Wow.
So that's what you do. And it's really complicated, and it takes a large amount of time, and it takes a very large team to do it. So, that's what I moved into. But that, for me, was fantastic.
Yeah.
To me, that was hugely stimulating. You were dealing with the regulators. So that's when it really got
fun.
It really became more fun.
I see.
One, because you were really breaking new ground, right? You were designing trials, which meant you had to understand the disease state and this and but what I loved perhaps more than anything else was the statistical component of design. It was fun. What about the power of the study? What's the alpha? What's the beta? How do you design a trial to, what's the the effect size you're going to see in a study, and how do you make sure the study is large enough to show that effect size? And, you know, if an effect size is too small, then it's meaningless, and why run the study? And a lot of sort of inside baseball sort of stuff, but it was great fun. It was sort of geeky. The math was geeky, if you like.
No, it's interesting. It sounds like you liked pharmaceutical companies. So my question was going to be, why pharmaceutical companies, and did you ever think of switching out of it, or you just knew kind of when you were designing these trials in the very beginning, when you transitioned from kind of the doctor to doctor liaison kind of thing? Was there a click? Was it like, this is what I want to do, I want to get much better at this is going to be my life? Or did you just kind of fall into it, I guess? It
was a wild ride for a start, right? You know, I joined the industry, I was working on sort of Tagamet way after its heyday. And suddenly these SSRIs came along, and they were like, this was the big thing, right? And all of a sudden, I mean, this was massive, huge back in the early 90s, you know, and everyone wanted to know about them. And you got to interact with all the preeminent, many of the preeminent psychiatrists of the day. I mean, me as a lowly sort of registrar, they wouldn't give you the time of day. But when you were running these clinical studies, when you were interacting with them, when you were sort of bringing these new drugs through to patients, you got to meet with all the biggest names in psychiatry of the day, and it was great. It was terrific fun. You know, and they were learned and they were interesting, and you learned just so much, and things were changing all the time. So it was really great. It's really good fun.
And then, just give me a kind of a short rundown of kind of the remainder of your career up until what you're doing now. So you just continue doing kind of similar pharmaceutical, developing drugs, running clinical trials and things like that at various
So I think at that time it was like a training ground.
Got it. Okay.
You put it, and I've always said this, right?
Yeah.
When you go to a great company, SmithKline Beecham, great company, right? It really gives you a solid grounding. You learn from, as well as learning from all the sort of really big names in psychiatry, you also learn from people who had deep experience in running clinical studies, interacting with the FDA and the European regulatory authorities, in how it should be done right, in how to develop a drug effective, how to demonstrate efficacy, how to ensure the safety of a drug, how to do things right, how to file what we call an NDA. We've spoken about that, a new drug application, a massively complex 10-year process, right? You really got a phenomenal training in that. So that was really SmithKline Beecham was a training ground. And at the end of SmithKline Beecham, I wanted to, I'd done it all. I'd written the documents, I'd designed the studies, I'd individually, personally done a lot of this stuff. And I thought I wanted to step, for me then it was a question of moving up to a more senior position where I could oversee. And I also wanted to broaden out of just CNS, central nervous system drugs. I wanted to diversify. So I joined another company, Forest Labs, as their head of clinical. It was a small company in New York, but it gave me the opportunity to run their whole clinical group. And when I joined, the clinical group was about 40 people. And then we were very successful. We got a drug called Celexa approved, and we got a drug called Lexapro approved, and we got a drug called Namenda. We developed them, and that was great. That my team we sort of designed the programs, took them through the FDA, and got the drugs approved, and they were incredibly successful and important drugs. And the team, everything went up tenfold. So my team went from 4 to 400. The company grew enormously. It was a wildly exciting time. And then my boss left, and I became the head of R&D there. So I had about 900 people reporting to me at the time. So I was there for 10 years, and then I came back to Pennsylvania and worked for a company called Endo Pharmaceuticals for 6 years. Also as chief scientific officer, running a smaller team at that point. And then most recently I was on the West Coast before I joined my current company, working 4 years at a company called Nectar Therapeutics.
Yeah. That's a lot of people, 900 people.
Yes, it was. Well, we grew to that. We were much smaller earlier on. So.
And there was no master plan at any point. It wasn't say, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to switch to a company where I can lead these people, and you're like, I know I'm going to develop the next major CNS drug, and then I'll step down to a smaller company. There was nothing like that. I'm just wondering how you decide to make these transitions in your career. Do you look for a good boss? Do you look for a good company like?
I think all sorts of reasons, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I left SmithKline because I didn't see anywhere to go at SmithKline at the time, right? I wanted to do a more diverse role with a greater leadership responsibility. I did want leadership responsibilities. To me, that was exciting.
Yeah.
There's all aspects to it, right? Mentoring, bringing people along, getting more done things through other people, et cetera, et cetera. So it was time. And also SmithKline it's a fabulous training ground, but it's a massive sort of you can't really move the needle at a big company unless you're the CEO. And some might say even CEOs have trouble moving the needle at really big companies. They're very static. So I moved to a smaller company, which became a bigger company, actually. As I said, that grew quite meaningfully. And each time I think I stepped down to a smaller company where you could have more of an impact. It's not, why do you move on, right? Sometimes it's just chemistry at the top doesn't, you don't see eye to eye. And at senior levels, that happens a lot.
Okay.
Changing philosophies, changing direction of the company, it is what it is, basically,
And so let's step back to the 900, leading 900 people. I can't even picture really 900 people. Did anyone teach you how to manage other people? And did you take who gave you the best piece of advice or best piece of tactics on leadership? And then we'll go into what you've learned as you go through it.
So people talk about management and they talk about leadership. And I think they are different. I do. I mean, they are different. I mean, there's books written on this. I'm not an expert on this, but I do find it very interesting. Management is sort of, it's really getting things done through, they're both getting things done through people, right? But managing is about clarity. It's about setting clear goals. It's about ensuring that the right people are in charge. It's managing resources, managing budgets, managing times, all that sort of stuff. It's right. It's tangible, And for me, leadership is somewhat more mystical, I think. I think there was a commander, and it was, I forget, it was a US general, I forget which one it was, and it was sort of back 60 years ago, so it was sort of not particularly gender correct, but his view was because he talked about men, he said, getting the other fella to want to do what you need him to do. So leadership is about, good leaders, in my view, have people wanting to do stuff that they need them to do. It's not about telling someone to do it. It's not about fear. It's about, look, Mr. Whatever or Mrs. Whatever said, we need to get this done. Therefore, I need to do whatever I can to ensure that what he needs done or what she needs done gets done. And it's because I want to do that for that person. It's not about being commanded to do something. It's about, I'll do whatever that person wants. It's often referred to in military terms. If someone says, we're going over that hill almost to certain death, and the people go, that's okay. If you tell me to do it, I'm doing it. I'm there by your side, right? Bad leaders are the ones who get shot in the back by their troops as they go over that hill. They're the first people. And I think leadership, and I'm more about leadership than management, I guess I'm talking about. Leadership is more of a privilege. You have to see it as a privilege. It sort of generally gets thrown on you when you're not expecting it sometimes. And you shouldn't, and bad leaders think they're better or they're more important so I always think of leadership. My view on leadership is it's a pyramid, right? And a bad leader thinks he or she sits on top of that pyramid. Everyone underneath them is supporting them. And a good leader thinks of an inverse pyramid, and they're at the bottom of that pyramid. They're holding everyone up. They have to support everyone. They are there for the people. So that's sort of conceptually, I think, how I'd like to think I'm at the bottom of the pyramid, But I think that's leadership. Leadership, this sort of ephemeral sort of thing that some people have, but I think they almost don't. They're almost reluctant. It's almost a reluctant. I think the most important thing about leadership is, go on about it, is
important.
It's humility. It's humble leader, humility is the most, from my experience with was having reported to leaders, humility is the most important thing. And when you lose it, when you start to think you're really important, then you should step away.
How do you get people to want to jump over that hill into battle for you? Are there specific things or tactics or thoughts?
They have to believe they have to believe that what they're doing is for the right reason. So they have to trust you. To the extent, if you're a leader and you go, you have to earn their trust. And I think that's the thing. How do you get them to go over that hill? You say, guys, gals, we're going over this hill now. We have to go over this hill. And they don't say, but why? Why should we go over that hill? They say, look, if X says we're going over the hill, we're going over the hill, man.
Yeah.
Ladies.
I know. It's fine. You can say that. It doesn't just next time say ladies. It's fine.
Yeah. We're going over the hill.
Yeah. So if you were advising someone who's taking on their first leadership role, who's about to lead 5 people for the first time, what would you tell them? Or manage and lead, I guess, is what you're saying.
Be humble.
Yeah.
Be humble. You're part of them.
Yeah.
I was made a leader, but without it, it gets put upon you, right? And you don't feel particularly proud. I mean, other people, your mum can feel proud.
Yeah.
Dad can feel proud, but it's no great achievement just to be put in the lead spot. You have to earn that. You have to earn that lead spot. And it doesn't make you any better or any different. That's the other thing. Don't let it go to your head. It shouldn't. It's meaningless. It's really about the purpose, right? It's not about
the title.
It's not about the title. It's not about, there's rewards with it, right? You move up, you get more rewards. It's financially helpful. But actually, it's really great. I mean, as a manager, now this is sort of this is where this is where they come together, right? When you hire someone great, or you develop someone great, and you see them go into a meeting, and you see them perform brilliantly in front of your boss or the board or something like that, that's an amazing feeling. It's like your child doing well, right? If you get that feeling, then I think you're a reasonable leader. Because it's a reflection on you. You want the whole thing about, and I'm intermingling management leadership, but I think what you should try and do is almost make yourself expendable. You want to hire everyone there so you can focus on different stuff. Right?
Give all the praise, take all the criticism, kind of thing. Yeah.
Bingo. That's another role, right? That's a good manager. Managers take all the criticism and avoid all the praise. But the people working with you, your reports, for lack of a better term, they know that. Yeah. But you're not doing it so they know that. It's complicated, but you should seem like you should never feel different. I think that's really important.
Got it. And generally, because we're talking about different careers in medicine, people who, for some reason, they go into pharmaceuticals or they go into some corporate world, a lot of people going through medical school, they have no job experience. They don't know what the corporate world's like. What advice would you have for someone who's never really had a quote-unquote real job that's just been in the hospital? Because it's very different, right, the hospital life than the corporate world. You've said it to us multiple times now. How should someone, maybe specifically from the medical field, navigate the corporate world?
So that's a really good question. I like that question because, I've obviously, but I've been in pharmaceuticals 3 years, which is a corporate job, right? And it's very different from medicine. Medicine trains you in a completely different way. When you're alone on the ward at night, it's down to you to make a split-second decision. It's not like you have to canvass opinion and you have a meeting the next day and you work out 3 different options and, you pick a course and if it doesn't work, you've got to make a decision there and then, right? I mean, you can call people in, but at the time, it's down fundamentally, particularly if you're a doctor on, in a ward or alone, you're going to make a decision. You're generally the lead of that particular team or that particular group at that time, right? And it's not about consensus, and it's you have to go with your gut, right? You don't have time to do a lot of stuff at the time. Now it's all about training, right? You're not just making stuff up. You've been there before, and otherwise it wouldn't put you in that situation. I think when you leave, and I say this, that many doctors leave medicine, and I've seen the ones who go into pharmaceuticals. I mean, obviously they go elsewhere too. And a lot of them are very, very happy. Some aren't. Maybe 10% think it's the wrong decision, they go back to medicine. But 90%, I would say from my experience, maybe I'm just saying the one, but what I would say is you leave your white coat at the door. If you come in to that corporate environment thinking you're special because you're a doctor, I think you won't do very well. I think you'll fail. It's a great skill set and you've learned amazing things, and I'm not diminishing it in any way, shape or form, but you have to take that and you have to adapt it into a completely different environment. And if being an MD is important to you, the title, the stature, and once again, I'm not minimizing it, but if you want that to lead for you in the corporate world, it will only get you so far. It'll get you somewhere where you have to be an MD.
Yeah.
Then you're an MD in the corporate world. But if you want to move, use your skills like an accountant can use its skill to become the chief financial officer or even the CEO of a company. An MD could be the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. They have been, right? But it's not about them continuing to be a doctor and becoming a doctor as the CEO of a company. They have to learn a whole new skill set. You're going in and you've got a very valuable set of skills and knowledge base at the same time. And the company's attracted you for that. But you're just at the start of the learning curve. You're right on the bottom rung. That's great. You didn't come in as an accountant, you came in as a doctor, but you're still in a big corporation. Yeah, it happens to be focused on healthcare, but doesn't mean that just because you're a doctor, they're going to treat you like you're high and mighty. Or they might, but then they'll put you in this place where you're a doctor in the company, and that's what you do. And you don't become part of the company and rise up the company and play a broader and bigger role. And if that's what you want to do, then you have to sort of become you leave your white coat at the door, right? That's what you do.
Got it.
And I think that's true in other disciplines too, right? I mean, if you want the medicine, if you want to be a doctor doing doctoring but just not in hospital, but you want to work for a company as a doctor, then you can do that. But that's not really leaving medicine. That's doing medicine in a slightly different form, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess it's also you have to decide when you go into this other world what you want to do, too. Do you want to be practicing as a doctor using clinical skills inside of this corporate world, or do you want to enter the corporate world?
Yes, that's a huge decision. Yeah. You've got to really decide. You got to, what's the expression, to burn your bridge?
Burn your bridge. Yeah,
you've got to burn your bridge, right? You got to say, I've left it. I've left my white coat outside the door. I'm not going to wear that ever again. I'm just not going to wear a white coat again. Yeah. People aren't going to come to me and say, I've got this problem. Can you help me with it? Physically, a medical problem. They're going to come to you and say, when you were in medicine, and you saw cardiovascular disease, what were the measures you used and how could we put that how do you interpret that in a clinical trial environment, right? There may be bits of it, but they're not going to ask your opinion about, I'm not feeling great today, or they might, but that's going to become more and more removed. You're going to leave that.
Do you regret it all, losing your ability to prescribe? Because you can't prescribe medicine here. You don't regret it at all.
It was funny at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't do it when I came to America, but now I've lost it in England too.
Yeah,
they took it away. My license to
practice.
I still have a license. I'm a member of the General Medical Council, but I can't do
nowhere near the clinical hours necessary.
No, so. I can't prescribe or anything. I used to be able to until about 5 years.
You don't miss it at all.
It's fine, but even that was a funny thing, right? Even after, I guess it was 25, 30 years, suddenly someone said, well, you just actually can't prescribe anymore. You can't go back to England. I could. Originally, up till about 2010, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I could go back to the UK, and if I needed a script for something, I could sort of write a script. It would be private. I'm not on the, but I could still do it. Now they took that away, and it was like, wow, that's funny. But then I thought, well, I hadn't actually written a script for at least 20 years. It's just like.
So it's not a big deal.
No, but once again, it's someone's cutting away that. It's burning another bridge.
Yeah. So I guess. Now maybe we can step a little bit more away and just general, I guess, life advice and life changes, because I think hopefully the helpful thing about this podcast is it's, making non-classical decisions in medicine. And these are tough decisions. So if I were to ask you, what do you think were three, and they don't have to be the most impactful, but three impactful decisions that were good decisions that you've had in your life? And it doesn't have to be three, it could be one or two. But
no, I got three. I've probably got 4 or 5, actually.
Yeah.
You mean meaningful?
Meaningful, impactful.
Fundamentally, I think risk. Don't. So what sort of? I think someone once said, I like this quote. It's like when you get to the end, you never regret the things you did. You regret the things you didn't do. Mm-hmm. I think it's a great tenet. So there were jumps, right? Leaving medicine, because until then I'd followed a track, right? Leaving medicine was undoubtedly one of the best things I ever did. Marrying my wife and coming to America. That was easy.
Yeah.
3 big things. And there are other things, right? It was leaving SmithKline was another one. Doing an MBA was another one, another departure, right? But but I think those big 3 ones. Those were big 3.
Why do you think they were good? We can go in order, but why do you think they were so impactful? So we've done leaving medicine to pharma.
Right.
We don't have to talk about marrying.
Right.
But it is important, marrying someone that you connect with and that's going to be your team and your partner kind of going forward.
And it wasn't, I'm not going to go into it, but based on my background, it wasn't necessarily the easiest thing to do. Yeah. It was a jump, right? It wasn't conforming to what was expected. Each time it wasn't conforming, right?
And it is an important decision because you're spending a lot of time with this person, right? So it's definitely an important decision to make. But number 3, why moving to America? Why do you think that was so impactful?
Because you're moving continent, because it's tough to do that, right? You're leaving your family, you're leaving everything you know, and you go somewhere else. You're seeking your fortune elsewhere, right? I mean, for me, it was sort of a pragmatic. It was a good. If you want to be in pharmaceuticals, you do it in America, right? I mean, that's probably true of many industries. It's certainly true of pharma.
Got it.
It's this is where all the R&D is. This is where all the investment is. This is where most of the innovation comes from. The rest of the world follows the States in that regard. So why wouldn't you want to be in the center of everything?
Did you consider any other careers? Like, did you look at? I don't even know how big medical device. Probably not medical devices. But did you think about any other careers other than pharmaceuticals when you were making that initial switch, or at any point in your career?
It just seemed the logical one.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't that obvious at the time.
Yeah.
Don't forget, most people didn't.
Yeah.
It was like, could I have done something else? Could I have gone into insurance? Maybe, I mean, but what else, right? This was the obvious one. It was a burgeoning industry. It was the right time to go. And it was intellectually stimulating. It was, and I've spoken to a few people who seem very excited, happy, interested to be in the industry. Looking back, it's remarkable because it's always changing. I mean, this is, I think what you want is to grow and do new stuff all the time. And I'm constantly challenged with new stuff. I think that, some of it's financial now, trying to learn that. But I think the opportunity to constantly learn and be challenged and do new stuff is to me, it's very appealing. I didn't want to fall into doing the same stuff for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. I didn't want to become extremely good at something that I do a billion times.
I see.
I wanted to, for me, what's interesting is to do different stuff, to learn. I mean, even now, and we're investing, but, one day we're looking at primary biliary cholangitis, cholangitis, which oddly enough, I didn't know it was called that. I thought it was PBC because I went to med school at the Royal Free. And that was the global center for primary biliary cirrhosis at the time. So that's new to me this week. What else are we looking at? We're looking at primary arterial hypertension, all sorts of different disease states all the time, and learning stuff, really trying to come up to speed with this. So it's great to be doing that, to be understanding clinical programs and regulatory pathways and the science and all this behind these new areas and investing in them at this point is great. Yeah. I mean, it's all new stuff. So I think that's been terrific. That's been exciting. I'm not sure that answered your question. I went off.
No, I don't even. It's fine. It's interesting because it's. But now, why did you transfer from pharmaceutical companies to VC? Was it because you wanted? Because it seems like you went from big companies and then got smaller and smaller and smaller, and now you're at the smallest company you've ever been at.
Because I met my one of my partners, the founder of our venture capital company, and at the time I just left the job, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I knew I didn't want to be a CEO.
Yeah. Because that's the next logical step.
Well, it is, but I'd sort of worked for several CEOs, and it didn't seem a particularly rewarding job to me.
Got it.
So I mean, just hard. You've got, I won't go into it, but to me, it wasn't. It didn't. I don't think the area that you have to be really good at, or the broad area you have to be good at, is sort of it's very diverse, and it wasn't not necessarily the most interesting areas for me.
Yeah, got it.
So I could have become another head of R&D or a chief scientific officer again.
Yeah,
but I'd done that sort of 3 times.
Yeah,
and so I wasn't sure. I really don't know. I didn't want to be a CEO. It was something I wanted to do something different at that time. So this is even more quick. It's much more quick moving. It's an opportunity to bring all so the way we're structured, and we're not going to go into it here, of course, but the way we're structured, my particular skill set marries very well with my 2 partners' skill set, because we all had lots of operation experience in different ways of doing pharmaceuticals.
And you're happy at this new.
Happiest I've been.
Really?
It's fun, wonderful.
That's fantastic.
And we're building a team.
Yeah.
And we've got some great people now on board. And I think we're making really important investments, which hopefully will grow, as well as being incredibly valuable for patients and will actually create wealth for people investing with us.
Yeah. But looking back at your 18 or 20-year-old self, would there be anything you would tell 18-year-old Ivan or 20-year-old Ivan, listen, think about this, do this, change this, or not? So,
look, I think they're life lessons. I mean, it worked out well, right? So no regrets. Seriously, no regrets. I just, if I had to track a course, I think I've been incredibly lucky. Getting on with it.
Yeah.
I don't believe in. So personally, I don't believe in taking a year out to find yourself. I think you can do that when you get to when you're sort of older than me, or when you've been successful or whatever, and you've got the time and money to luxuriate in that. But fundamentally, there's no right way. Finding yourself, there's no way to tell what the future holds in store.
Yeah.
Finding yourself is procrastinating. So I'll be harsh.
Yeah.
I think that's procrastination. I think that's avoiding it. And taking time off for a year doesn't help you necessarily. In many people's case, doesn't actually help them move forward. It just stops them having to make a decision. Make a decision. So I think make a decision, move, keep moving.
Yeah.
The world is moving very fast. It's highly competitive. If you don't fill a vacuum, someone else will fill a vacuum, and you'll get left behind. So I believe it's competitive, and I'm competitive. I believe you should push from day one. I think you make mistakes, and it doesn't matter. And I know you're a big believer in that.
Yeah.
That you have to make mistakes. You push, you make a mistake, and you adjust course. I don't think you reverse course. I think if you think about it from an angle standpoint, if you're going in that direction, you don't turn around and go the other direction. You use the momentum and you move 20 degrees off or 15 degrees off. Never 180, never 90. You've lost momentum. You want to keep moving. You use what you've got to get you to the next step. Never reverse, because that whatever you've got, medicine or finance, someone's interested you in that. They're not interested in you because they like you as a person. Well, they might be. You know what I mean? Yeah. But if they're in a business, they want to use what you've got to the benefit of their business, to their benefit of whatever they're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
That's sort of. So I would say, push, be aggressive, be impatient. Be impatient. Take risk. Be impatient. Change course. And don't worry.
Yeah.
Keep moving.
Yeah. If you were speaking to if you were speaking to a smart, driven high school student,
yes,
what would you tell them? Say they're in their junior year of college, their junior year of high school, senior year of high school. They're very smart, they're very driven, but they don't really know what they want to do. They don't know if they want to go to college or not go to college. They don't know if they want to study biomedical engineering or English.
Once again, harsh, right?
Yeah, be harsh.
Don't follow your dreams. Yeah. That's poetic and sounds nice. Be pragmatic. if you're really smart, it depends on what you want. Okay, so if you want to have financial rewards, then structure your life to get financial rewards.
Yeah.
If you want to spend your life circling the earth and and living on a boat or whatever, then be realistic. But don't expect that you follow your dreams and let's say you want to follow your dreams and you want to get rich, but those two don't coincide.
Yeah.
I mean, if you happen to be a genius mathematician, your dream is to be a hedge fund manager, then do it. If you want also interested in getting rich, right? So, but if you really want to, I'm trying to think of something, history of art, right? I desperately want to travel, but I want to be very wealthy and sort of have a good corporate job. Well, maybe history of art's not the best idea, particularly if you're really smart and you can also pursue finance or maths. I think if you can pursue a qualification that has a clear track to a job, that's, where there's going to be always a need for people with that skill set. And particularly if it's pure mathematics, that's really hard. But if you're adept at mathematics, if you're really a great physicist or a mathematician, you're going to get jobs in tech or whatever. But I think you should pursue it, even if it's not your romanticized view. But that's me. I would say don't get caught up in your dreams. There's plenty of times to dream, down the road, but do something pragmatic.
Do you think there's certain bad advice that high school students get? Is that the bad advice? Follow your dreams? Are there any other pieces of bad advice?
I'm not sure
18-year-olds, 19-year-olds.
I don't know. It's been a while. When I was at school, we met sort of people who told us what they think we'd be good at. I can't remember what they thought I'd be good at. I don't know that medicine was necessarily top of the list. It might have been. I don't think it was. So they look at they do these profiles and they say, look, you should probably pursue this, that, or the other, which is fine. But I think be realistic. What do you want? What's the goal? Yeah. And it's not about, and I think the other thing is always think 2-3 moves ahead, right? It's not about where I want to spend the next 2 years. It's what I want to do after those 2 years. Where do I want to get? Don't think about the next thing. Don't think about enjoying the next thing. I mean, I get it. Life's not a complete grind just to get to the end. And then you look back and say, well, it was really crappy getting here, but I got to a good place. I mean, maybe that's good. But I think I'm not saying don't do what you want to do, but be
pragmatic. Because maybe that second, third step, if you don't think about it, won't be so great anyway.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And if you don't plan it out, who knows what that second or third place could be or anything like that. Go ahead.
No, I would say, one, don't just follow your dreams. Don't, because that's nice, but really, who's got a lot of time for that?
Yeah.
Two, if you're really good at something that takes you to a really good job, I always pursue it. You don't have to do it down the road. Mm-hmm. But medicine was a bit like that for me, right? It was a challenge. I really liked the idea of doing medicine. I really was interested in the subject. Yeah. Academically, intellectually. I thought, and it was a challenge. It was really hard. You mix with really smart people. That's the other thing, right? If the journey is important, people say the journey is important, it is, go to the best schools. Work, or not the best schools, but the schools that challenge you. Work alongside people, study with people who are going to push you maximally, right? Because that's great. I think that's what you should do. Because one, it's beneficial to you in the long run, and two, it's beneficial along the way. I think,
and I think it creates more options too. I mean, there's people in high school that score better on their tests. A lot of people say it's not about test scores, blah 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 blah, but the increased optionality you have from a high SAT score or a high GPA is so much greater than someone with a low SAT score, someone who doesn't graduate high school or something like that. Your options are much fewer than the options you have if you do well.
To be blunt, I did an MBA, right?
Yeah.
It's not about having an MBA. It's about where you go for that MBA. Where you go for that is almost more important than having the MBA, right?
Yeah.
If you go to the best school you can go to, right? So it's just like at college, go to the best college. It says a lot about you. Yeah. It says someone's looked at you and selected you. Someone's done that process for you, right?
Yeah.
If you come out of Harvard or Yale or you name it, right, or Oxford or Cambridge, they've done a big selection process there.
Yeah.
You're going to get a good job because you went there. Let's not fool around, right? It's real.
Are there any degrees or letters on the end of your name that you think are wastes of time, like a master's degree or an MBA, which it sounds like you don't think is a waste of time, or a Ph.D., or do you think they're all worthwhile?
I think they're all. I mean, I think they're all worthwhile.
Okay.
I do. Maybe there are some that are a waste of time. I mean, the ones that you didn't really work for, you just got given.
Okay.
But clearly a master's separates you from a BSc or a BA, right?
Do you think an MBA from a lower tier school name is worth it or no?
It's an interesting question. Once again, my view on an MBA is don't step out if you're in the middle of your career. Try and avoid stepping out of that career for 2 years to do it.
Yeah.
Try and do it as you're going along.
Yeah.
I wouldn't step out. So it's what's the alternative, right? If you're in a job, a good reasonable job, and the company says we'll back you. One, we'll back you. Two, you do it at the same time. We'll give you a weekend every 3 weeks to go do your MBA or whatever masters you do, or you do it at night time. That's what you should do. You shouldn't get off to do. Then the value is slightly more questionable. But if you can get the MA or the MBA or whatever you're doing as you're moving along and you haven't really stepped off to get it, that's really valuable.
And you saw more opportunities created because you had the MBA?
Huge, yeah.
Like specifically higher positions?
Yeah, I think, as a doctor, right? As someone who's trained in life sciences, I think for me, there were various reasons to do it, but I was in the corporate world, right? I was still doing science, but in the corporate world, and I wanted to evolve in the corporate world. I wanted to understand about finance, and I wanted to understand about law, and I wanted to understand about management, and I wanted to understand about leadership, and so on and so forth, and operations management, and and linear programming and economics. It was fantastic. It was actually the most enjoyable education of all the things I've done in education. My MBA was by far the most enjoyable because it was different. I was learning all about it, and it gave me huge respect. I loved accounting. I mean, it's an amazing science. And what it gave me an appreciation for, the MBA actually, was that all of these areas, I come from the discipline of science, of medicine and biology and whatever. And I always thought, well, we're really, science is clever. It's constructed. It's based on sort of proof and, evidence and, and we classify animals based on whatever. And medicine's like that too. And, but what you realize is that, and I didn't, and maybe more fool me, and maybe I wasn't well read enough, but when you look at law, it's built on founding principles and it builds up and it's structured. And double entry bookkeeping and accounting is fantastic. It came from the Greeks and it's wonderful. And it's an amazing thing that the Greeks, I think it was the Greeks discovered 2,000, 3,000, however long ago. And it's really smart. Similarly, leadership, there are principles. There's, these areas, these specialities, these fields, it gives you just a sort of basic but understanding, but what the sort of the origins of how they've all evolved. And I think that was fascinating to me, to see how these disciplines sort of had built up.
In the pharmaceutical world, you've worked with a bunch of people. What are the characteristics of people that do well in the pharmaceutical world? Or I guess maybe this is a more general question because the pharmaceutical world is like just a corporation, right?
Okay, so that's one of those questions, right?
Yeah.
There are at least two types of people who do well in corporations.
Yes.
There are the people, well, there's lots of people, right? But unfortunately in corporations, because of the way all sorts of pyramids work.
Large
right?
corporations,
Large corporations. I mean, you can look at areas of the world at the moment and who are not the very top person, but he's surrounded. I've got somewhere in mind at the moment.
Yeah, uh-huh.
We're
recording this in November 2nd, November 3rd, 2022.
He's surrounded himself in a part of the world, I'm not talking about, anywhere local, but with people who will not question anything he does, who will nod their head. And that exists everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. So I think one of the weaknesses of corporate structures is that sometimes people get to the top and they surround themselves by sort of titular people who nod their head and don't challenge. And that goes back to leadership. I think great leaders want to surround themselves by people who are going to challenge them, and they want them to be challenged. So I think, that's I guess those people do well. People who don't want to do anything but to support the boss do quite well in corporate environments. I've seen some really good ones in my own experience. People who know what the boss is thinking before the boss is thinking it, and sort of agree with him or her before they say it. So it's sort of there's that type of person who does well in corporate environments. Don't come to the table with anything particularly imaginative or anything particularly any new thoughts or genius ideas or but that's okay. I mean, but I think that's why big corporations sometimes struggle or they get fat, dumb, and happy or whatever they do.
It doesn't sound okay to me, to be perfectly honest. That because it's not. I mean, you're not creating something new. You're not going into it for the betterment of creating whatever your company is doing. If your company creates soap or something, for example, you're not doing it to make the best soap in the world. You're just doing it to make the soap that your boss likes. You know what I mean?
Yes, something like that. I think that's why I prefer small companies because you're much more accountable.
Okay.
In a small company, you're more accountable. There's risk, right? If someone can see that you're not doing anything, they'll get rid of you.
Yeah.
Whereas in a large company, you can pretty much survive. As long as you don't rock the boat, you can hover along for 30 years.
30 years.
Yeah.
Wow. So who's the other type of person?
Well, there's many types. I mean, then there's the driven, the really smart people will do well in most organization, right? Really forward-thinking people. It depends, right? In R&D, you need innovative people. In sales and commercial, you need imaginative people who have who are able to persuade. But if you're a great salesman, you're going to be persuaded. So there's no. If you're in finance, you have to have a great mathematical mind, right? Yeah. Or you can do complex structures. So and if you're a great lawyer, once again, so you can bring your discipline to bear.
And specifically in the pharmaceutical world, you've hired and fired a bunch of people, correct?
Yes.
So when looking to hire someone, what do you look for in a person?
Well, there were 4 things, and I'm not going to remember them all. And 2 of them are innate. 2 of them are innate, and 2 of them are learnt on the job, right? So in what I do, pharmaceutical development, for example, obviously really smart real smart people, right? That's innate. That's inherent innate. I also generally want people who can get on with other people. So those are the 2 inherent pieces, right? Do you think there's good chemistry, and are they going to bring sort of significant intellect to the table? And then on the other side, specific technical experience. In other words, if I'm developing a cardiovascular drug, I might want someone who's got deep knowledge in the cardiovascular medicine. And then the other specific skill is how much experience do they have in pharmaceuticals? How much have they developed a drug before? Have they got it approved with the FDA? Do they know how to run a clinical trial? Do they? So there's the technical skill. There's their sort of basic training skill. They're an MD and they know a lot about cardiovascular medicine. There's their pharmaceutical skill. They've developed a bunch of drugs. They can run a program. They can write an NDA, whatever. And then are they smart? And are they going to get on with other people? Are they going to be a good part of the team? I think those are some of the things you look for when you're hiring.
And do you suss out any of these things during the interview? Are the main things you suss out during the interview kind of, are they smart and will they get along kind of thing?
It's often, I've made some stunning mistakes in that regard. Are they going to get along? Some wonderful mistakes. I hired a very senior person once and we fired him 6 weeks later and he convinced that it's whatever people say and all these personality inventories and things, people are pretty good at duping the system, right? They can come across completely different interview to but it comes out in the wash pretty quickly. But what you do know, generally speaking, is their track record. If they've got a good track record and they've generally spent reasonable time you can see it from the CV. If you spent 3 to 5 years in a job and you've moved up every 3 to 5 years and you've gone increasingly senior roles with increasing senior responsibility, generally speaking, that's, and then you get references and things like that. But it's always good also to get someone who knows.
Yeah. Someone you know knows. Yeah, yeah. So let's step back even more now, going from corporate world to just life. In the past 5 years, do you think if you had to name one belief, behavior, or habit you think that's most improved your life? Can you think of anyone? Belief, behavior, or habit, or anything in the past 5 years, so recent history, that's most kind of improved your life? Is there anything? And this doesn't have to be job. This could be regular life. This could be finance. This could be health. This could be anything.
That's a really tough question, right?
I know. Or
Look,
just not most improved your life.
No.
But
Well,
yeah.
I think what's had you give me 5 years.
5
right?
years.
5
Past,
years.
I'm specifically something new that you've started doing, or a new thought you've had, or a new way you attack problems in the past 5 years.
Well, I've had a trainer for the last 5 years who's made a huge effect.
Really?
A huge effect on my life. He's made me, a
physical personal trainer.
Personal trainer, yeah. So not a spiritual trainer.
Yeah.
So I know that sounds like that's not particularly deep, but I don't have backache anymore.
Yeah.
I feel I can lift anything.
Yeah.
There's no physical challenge that particularly I sort of pull away from. Because for 25, even when you were tiny, your mum lifted you because I had a bad back, right? So he's made a dramatic effect on my life in that regard. What else? I think, joining this company, it's been great. I mean, it's just fun.
Yeah.
That's been terrific. And it's helped, there's a good life balance, work-life balance. We're fortunate that I get to work sort of out of the Northeast, not in the Northeast, in the wintertime.
In warmer areas.
In warmer areas. So that's also good, right? That's a bit of privilege.
Yeah.
And I respect that. So,
that's great.
But, have I redesigned my life? No. I mean, it's been fun. And since having a bit of financial freedom is always a good thing too.
Yeah. And then final words, we're coming near the end here. If you had words for someone who was considering, or advice for someone considering leaving the career of clinical medicine, or maybe someone who's interested in working in the pharmaceutical field, or any closing words in general, in this general theme of kind of alternative careers in medicine, what would you say to them?
I would say to them, do it for a positive reason. Don't do it to escape. Do it because you want to do something else. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Don't, because you get people who've been in clinical medicine for 20, 30 years and they get so fed up with it, they go, I'm going to do something else. Well, then it's too late. Mm-hmm. I'd also say don't wait around. If it's not what you are passionate about, if you are really harboring, because if you were in anything else, it's this big sort of stigma, right? If you do medicine, it's a vocation and you should never leave it. And I think you have to change that mindset a little bit. For me, it was, right? For me, it was a discipline. It was a science, but it wasn't a vocation. It was a job. And it was fascinating and I enjoyed it enormously. But it didn't mean I couldn't do something else. So I think you have to, you fight to become a doctor and there's this amazing, whatever the word is, about being one, right? But leaving it's like leaving other things. If you're a lawyer, you can become a corporate lawyer or not do law, right? Or if you're an accountant, you can leave it. And you can leave medicine and you shouldn't be frightened. I guess that's the bottom line. Don't be frightened about it. There is life after medicine.
What a word to end on. What a thing to end on. Well, thank you so much, Dad. It was really, really, really great and really, really helpful, I think, to people who are considering maybe different careers in medicine, which I think is strangely a taboo topic, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
That's right.
Thank you.
Pleasure.